this, that come up very often. It's unusual. Yeah, I mean, of course, it was. I wanted to work with Ridley, and Steve's a fantastic writer. But then also Charlton Heston, and just thinking, well, how can we do that differently? And that sort of crazy challenge of playing, when you know yourself to be the idiot that you are, and then being asked to play such a monumental figure, that's sort of irresistible.
Nearly had the opportunity of working with Ridley about 10 years ago, or I thought in my mind I was close to having the opportunity. I had sent an audition tape to him for Kingdom of Heaven, and I'd heard through the grapevine that he had me in a kind of probably a handful of people that he was trying to work out if he could put me in the movie. And ever since then, and that was 10 years ago, kind of roughly, almost exactly 10 years ago before I got the phone call about this, I'd had him in my mind as someone that I really, really had wanted to work with for a long time. And, and to be honest, when I got the job for this, I was like, really? Like, okay. Well, it was a tough thing to wrap my head around. But I'm also someone who really loves a challenge, and has always loved playing dress-ups. It was probably the most extreme version of that. But there was a lot of trepidation I had because of such a big movie, and I was scared. But being scared also made me excited.
But any time there's that level of sort of driven passion, there's always the chance that it's going to be really funny when you're not meaning it to be. You're always walking a really fine line. And so it was, it's good to watch Life of Brian because it's just bloody funny, but also because it's just the sort of red flag of how easily you can start making Life of Brian but without meaning to. And then there's all the other texts and, religious texts that you have, and you've got the Ten Commandments, and there's an awful lot.
There is a lot of work that you can put together, and obviously I think that you did, because I think read a lot, and you read the Quran, and I read this in your production notes, so I'm assuming that it's true. But you did a lot of work on establishing the reality and truth of the character.
Well, I think that what I've come to realise is I try to do as much research as I can, because I sort of have this doubt about me really knowing anything. And so, you try to fill your head with as much information as you can in the hope that will give you the confidence to feel like you can actually play the role. And oftentimes it doesn't really come into play, in the film. There are many times when I look back on the film and I go, I didn't really need to do any of that. But it just sort of is there as a safety net that you can fall back on, and just in case you get there one day and the director's had a bad night and he's, can't talk or something that day, and you've just got to wing it yourself, then you've got something that you can fall back on, and that you feel a little bit more informed about. But so it's always through a sort of an element of trying to gain confidence that I do the research. But it would be a very boring film if we actually included everything in there that I personally found interesting. But then also there's an awful lot that Rid found very interesting as well. And a lot of our conversations before filming were, well, where are we going to finish the film? Yeah. Because we kept on wanting, you go, okay, well, right, so they've crossed the Red Sea, and then you've got, well, then, can we make a film without the Ten Commandments being present? Can you really make a film about Moses and not mention the Ten Commandments? But any time there's that level of sort of driven passion, there's always the chance that it's going to be really funny when you're not meaning it to be. You know, you're always walking a really fine line, and so it was. You know, it's good to watch Life of Brian because it's just bloody funny, but also because it's just the sort of red flag of how easily you can start making Life of Brian, but without meaning to. And then there's all the other texts and, you know, religious texts that you have, and you've got the Ten Commandments, and there's an awful lot, there's an awful lot of
there's research. There is a lot of work that you can put together, and obviously I think that you did, because you, I think, read a lot, and you read, you know, the Quran, and I read this in your production notes, so I'm assuming that it's true, but you did a lot of work on establishing, you know, the reality and truth of the character.
Well, I think that what I've come to realise is I try to do as much research as I can, because I sort of have this doubt about me really knowing anything. And so, you know, you try to fill your head with as much information as you can in the hope that that will give you the confidence to feel like you can actually play the role. And oftentimes it doesn't really come into play, you know, in the film. There are many times when I look back on the film and I go, I didn't really need to do any of that. But it just sort of is there as a safety net that you can fall back on, and just in case you get there one day and the director's had a bad night and he's, you know, can't talk or something that day, and you've just got to wing it yourself, then you've got something that you can fall back on, and that you feel a little bit more informed about. But so it's always through a sort of an element of trying to gain confidence that I do the research. But it would be a very boring film if we actually included everything in there that I personally found interesting. But then also there's an awful lot that Rid found very interesting as well. And a lot of our conversations before filming were, well, where are we going to finish the film? Yeah. Because we kept on wanting, you know, you go, okay, well, right, so they've crossed the Red Sea, and then you've got, well, then, you know, can we make a film without the Ten Commandments being present? Can you really make a film about Moses and not mention the Ten Commandments? But then you've got the Ten Commandments, and then you've got the sin of the golden calf, and you're like, well, that's going to take another 45 minutes. With that, you know. And then you've got all this great stuff that comes later, and it's really great stuff, but there's a point where you've just got to, you know, put a nail in it.
Sequel.
Joel, what about your character?
Well, I mean, on one hand, I kind of looked at a lot of the text, and it just seemed to say that the Pharaoh just constantly said no. And you know, a lot of what I like to do is look at what the writer provides, and then to do any extra research or thinking or reading or examination of my own. Is sometimes it feels like you come back to the production and say, oh, well, you know, what about this? And maybe it just uncovers one or two little things, but hopefully everything you need is in the script. Now, forgetting a historical or a biblical context, for me, what I found very resonant about the story was the story of the two characters and their relationship with each other, you know, not blood brothers, but raised as such. And I did a lot of thinking about why Ridley must have had a response to that, and why Steve Zalian's script in particular, I don't know whether he examined other versions of this story or other filters to look at this story, but I feel like maybe Ridley had such a response to this script of Steve Zalian's because of that filial relationship, and I have a strong sense of that in my life as well. And
you have a brother as a director, I believe.
Yeah, and he's here tonight. And yeah, I thought if that would be funny if there was one clap and it was him clapping. But you know what I mean? Like the relationships, like forgetting, sometimes I like to forget about what we're wearing, which is extreme. And
that's tricky.
We would be on set talking about the life of Brian, which now makes sense to me, because I'd be standing there in bright gold, my golden carp outfit, I would call it, and my white skirt, and Christian had very, very much more sensible brown leather and blues on it. And then we'd look at these two chariots, and one was brown and one was gold, and he'd be like, I wonder which chariot is
Any sort of tried and true method that that you stick to, you do whatever you feel is right for each and every part.
And it was a little stronger in the script, I think, than the final cut, but that feeling of going, well, this is my real dad, this is not my real brother, but he kind of likes, respects, trusts, and enthuses about him more than he does me. And they're just...
It was sort of like our relationship with Ridley.
He's a machine.
But did you have a good rehearsal time with him, or talks about your characters?
Really just talks. A lot of times, we didn't rehearse really, did we?
We rehearsed one scene.
Yes, right.
Sword scene, and I just was like, I'm going to get fired after this rehearsal.
So we didn't rehearse anymore after that.
Right.
But most of the time he would just roll straight off, and he uses multiple cameras.
Oh, interesting.
Which is, I really love that, and then he directs more in gestures. That sort of thing to you. Right? And we shot this in 74 days. Most directors would have shot this in 120 days or something.
Or 120 years.
I really appreciate that, because when you shoot an 120-day film, you just sort of have to reinvent yourself again and again and again. It's like shooting 5 films in a row. So 74, there's that momentum, and also you're just not sitting around as much as you are on most films, And because of the multiple cameras, so many times, I mean, I got used to it, you got used to it, but then when you get other actors who came in just for a few days, their heads would spin, because we'd sit down, we'd do scene a couple of times, moving on, and they go, what? And they were like, I thought I need, and he's like, no, you've got that shot, they got that shot, they got the master, they got everything, all done, and that's it, we're moving on. And you'd see them kind of going, oh, what just happened? They wanted it to take longer, they thought it would, like a normal big film like this, but really, really creates that momentum all the time.
Ridley, he's not here, but
We can talk about it.
I observed that he was more comfortable the bigger the setup with the more components. There's that scene in the barn with Christian and I when he first comes back from exile and comes to chat with me, puts a sword at my throat. That was sort of just the scene between the two of us, but of course Ridley has to have the orchestration of thieves taking 20 horses away in the background. And that to him is a two-hander. And he feels comfortable with the more the moving parts, it seemed like it's almost like maybe he's got ADD and that calms him down. That's his Ritalin or something in a way. But truly, he really handles big scale. I mean, could you imagine having 1,200... I saw one day on the call sheet that 1,200 lunches were being prepared. And Ridley doesn't seem at all fazed by that.
There was that one crew member who ate a lot of pies.
It's like, he just knows how to orchestrate those things, and he feels comfortable. But then, as he said, like, from his days of directing, he was, for a couple of years, he was shooting 100 commercials a year in his early career, that he was prepping one while he was finishing another, or he's shooting one while he's finishing another, that he's the most sort of decisive person I think I've ever worked with, especially on a bigger scale. His ability just to make a choice like that without batting an eyelid. And not only that, he will watch a rehearsal, and it's not a choice of going, okay, I'm going to put the camera here. He'd be like, I'm going to put the camera here, and the other camera here, and this camera's going to be here, and then he'd name like 8 places to put a camera, because he had
I mean, we shot most of the early Egyptian stuff first. We did jump around a bit, but there was...
Well, because we're on that stage.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
I watched your beard go.
Yes, so no. Yes. Yeah.
And he has the ability to fall asleep in a makeup chair like nobody else in the world. Wake up with a beard.
Well, it helps when you're sitting there for 3 hours, doesn't it? When you get there at 2 in the morning. This one does, as for instance, compared to the Ten Commandments, where to me personally, I watch the Ten Commandments and I feel like Cecil B. DeMille is making that with all the power of hindsight. Like, there's no doubt that this man is a good man and a prophet, and he will become a prophet, and he will become the most fascinating man in the Old Testament and the most important prophet in Judaism and all of that. And I think that from us we said, well, let's take it from the other perspective of not knowing what the outcome is going to be. And so, yes, you have a man who's grown up in essentially a fascist empire, and he understands the necessity for this pantheon of gods, and he understands the necessity for this slave labour in order for the empire to exist. And then circumstances and something that's just eaten away at him changes the course of his life, and he's off in the desert. And then the absolute terror, because Moses famously did try to tell God he wasn't the man for the job. He kept saying that. He kept saying, I'm not really, you've chosen wrong. And so all of that doubt and the absolute terror of, imagine that, on a mountain and suddenly you meet God. And that must be terrifying, So we didn't want to play it like it was just the most wonderful experience.
Right.
Absolutely, you could call it ecstatic, but it's ecstatic because you're probably having this just sensory, overwhelming experience that you couldn't believe, and his doubts about himself as being the vessel and the messenger for that, and all of that. So sort of the fact that you can't connect the dots looking forward, whereas the Ten Commandments, the film, seemed to sort of be able to connect all the dots.
Yeah.
With us, it was sort of, we were trying to go for, well, this man surely would know what was going to happen. And if he was correct, should he really leave his family? And then when he gets to the ghetto, the Hebrews are not exactly all jumping to come follow him immediately. And we wanted to include all of those doubts, which are very much in the Bible.
And truth. And I guess that's what I really enjoyed so much about this film, is that you took me on an experience. And I went on this journey with you, and even though I know things because I went to Catholic school, but still, this was still fresh and new, and an approach that I found really fascinating.
Themselves, because I do believe that you need to be prepared to genuinely feel and risk embarrassment in order to hopefully do something that can be quite wonderful. And so that inspires me when I see people treading that fine line, and even when it goes wrong, I still think good for them. That's what inspires me. It didn't work out, but I see how much risk, I guess, they were taking with it, and that possibility of people really thinking it's an awful performance. Because it's a fine line between that, being really awful and then really something quite transcendent.
Are you trying to tell me something? I'd agree with that, but I would add to that, Mike, because I would say a similar thing, but maybe what I'll say that's different is sometimes what really inspires me is watching children act. Because they sometimes really school you.
Oh man, have you ever seen that film Ponette?
No.
It's a French film, and it's the best acting ever, and I think the girl is 4 years old, and you just don't understand how they got the performance, and hopefully they weren't cruel. Really, because you look at the thing and you think, how can a 4-year-old understand what's going on? But if you want to see an incredible performance by a child, Ponette.
P-O-N-E-T.
T-T-E. By the time I read the script, it was already portrayed as that. My understanding is that it was Ridley's idea, and I mean, it really is better a question for him. I just sort of accepted it because I thought, well, how do you represent God? You know, I mean, Moses was meant to be the only man who ever actually saw God with his own eyes, spoke with him, you know, and such that later on in life he wore a veil because it was almost like his face had been disfigured from that. How on earth do you represent that? So